October 4th, 1943. Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. The oak-panelled conference room fell silent as Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring delivered his assessment to German aircraft manufacturers, his words recorded by stenographers for what would become one of history's most catastrophic miscalculations. The Americans cannot build aeroplanes. They are very good at refrigerators and razor blades. Through the tall windows of the Air Ministry, the assembled industrialists could see the smoke rising from Berlin's factories, working desperately to replace Luftwaffe losses. The Third Reich, though beginning to reel from defeats at Stalingrad and North Africa, still controlled most of Europe. In Göring's mind, shaped by outdated impressions from the 1920s, the United States remained a nation of jazz musicians and merchants, capable of producing consumer goods, but not weapons of war. What Göring didn't know was that at that very moment, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships per day. By the time his meeting ended, the Richmond shipyards alone would have completed another vessel. Within 6 months, those Americans who supposedly couldn't build aeroplanes would be sending 1,000 bomber raids over Germany, while their shipyards launched a new cargo ship every 8 hours. The mathematics of German defeat were being written not in battle plans, but in production statistics that would soon reveal the fatal delusion at the heart of Nazi strategy. Hermann Göring's dismissal of American industrial capacity wasn't born in 1943. It had deep roots in German military thinking. As a World War I flying ace who shot down 22 Allied aircraft, Göring had witnessed America's late and limited contribution to that conflict. The United States had entered World War I with virtually no air force and had to fly French and British planes. This memory shaped his fatal assumption about American capabilities. The specific quote about aeroplanes became Göring's standard response when questioned about American threat potential. He repeated variations throughout the early war years. In 1940, after France fell, he assured Hitler, "The Americans are good about making fancy cars and refrigerators, but that doesn't mean they are any good at making aircraft. They are bluffing. They are excellent at bluffing." This wasn't merely Göring's personal delusion. German intelligence systematically underestimated American potential. In November 1941, Oberst Josef Beppo Schmid, chief of Luftwaffe intelligence, submitted a report stating that American aircraft production could not exceed 400 planes per month. His analysis concluded that American factories lacked the precision tooling and skilled workers necessary for military production. German naval intelligence was equally dismissive. In January 1942, Kapitän zur See Heinz Assmann reported to Admiral Raeder that American shipbuilding capacity was limited to perhaps 1 cargo vessel per week per shipyard. "Their workers are soft," he wrote, "accustomed to high wages and short hours. They lack the discipline of German craftsmen." Even Hitler, while publicly dismissive, privately understood the danger. As he told his generals in December 1941, "We must defeat Russia quickly. Once that is done, we can deal with America before their production becomes overwhelming." But Göring, responsible for assessing enemy air power, remained convinced of American industrial weakness. Even as Göring repeated his dismissive assessment, America was transforming into what Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. On January 6, 1942, in his State of the Union address, Roosevelt announced staggering production goals. First, to increase our production rate of airplanes so rapidly that in this year, 1942, we shall produce 60,000 planes. The rate of increase will be maintained and continued so that next year, 1943, we shall produce 125,000 airplanes, including 100,000 combat planes. German intelligence intercepted these numbers. In his diary, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels wrote on January 8, 1942, "The Führer laughed when I showed him Roosevelt's production targets. Pure propaganda. If they could build 1/10 of these numbers, it would be a miracle." What the Germans didn't understand was that America had been preparing since 1940. The foundation had been laid not with military orders, but with British gold. The British Purchasing Commission, desperate for ships to replace those lost to U-boats, had approached American industrialist Henry J. Kaiser with an audacious proposal. Build 60 cargo ships using mass production techniques never before applied to shipbuilding. Kaiser, who had never built a ship but had constructed the Hoover Dam ahead of schedule, accepted the challenge. His approach would revolutionize not just shipbuilding, but the entire concept of wartime production. Instead of skilled shipwrights crafting each vessel individually, Kaiser would use prefabrication, welding instead of riveting, and assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturing. The Liberty ship design was deliberately simple, a 441-foot cargo vessel based on an old British pattern, powered by a triple-expansion steam engine that any mechanic could maintain. When German intelligence obtained technical specifications from a torpedoed Liberty ship in early 1942, they dismissed it as primitive. Korvettenkapitan Peter Kremer wrote, "These ships are coffins. Slow, ungainly, with the sailing characteristics of a brick." What Kremer failed to grasp was that the Liberty ship's simplicity was its genius. Every part was standardized. Every section was prefabricated in factories across America and shipped to 18 shipyards where they were assembled like giant three-dimensional puzzles. The learning curve was steep. Workers who had never seen a ship were outproducing veteran German shipwrights within months. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched on September 27, 1941, after 244 days of construction. German naval intelligence noted this with satisfaction. At that rate, Americans could build perhaps 50 ships per year. What they didn't notice was the acceleration. The second ship took 180 days. The 10th took 105 days. By January 1942, construction time had dropped to 70 days. Then Henry Kaiser made an announcement that German intelligence dismissed as pure propaganda. He would build a ship in 10 days. September 1942. Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation, Portland. As German U-boats enjoyed their second happy time, sinking 609,000 tons of Allied shipping that month, Kaiser's workers laid the keel of the SS Joseph N. Teal at 12:01 a.m. on September 13th. What followed was precisely choreographed industrial ballet. 3 shifts of workers laboured around the clock. Prefabricated sections, some weighing 250 tons, were lifted into place by massive cranes. Welders, many of them women who had never held a torch 6 months earlier, laid down miles of perfect beads. The workforce included housewives, farmers, and store clerks who had been transformed into shipbuilders in weeks. Among them was Wendy the welder, real name Janet Doyle, a former waitress who became one of the fastest welders in the yard. Working alongside her was Tom Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama who had become a master ship fitter, and Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American whose welding speed exceeded German standards. On September 23rd at 4:30 p.m., the SS Joseph N. Teal slid into the Columbia River exactly 10 days after her keel was laid. In Berlin, German intelligence dismissed the reports. Admiral Karl Dönitz told his staff, "Even if true, this is a stunt. They cannot maintain such production." But Kaiser wasn't finished. He announced, "We can do it faster." November 8, 1942, 12:01 a.m., Richmond Shipyard No. 2, California. As German forces retreated from El Alamein, American shipyard workers began an achievement that would demolish the last vestiges of German confidence. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary was laid as hundreds of prefabricated sections weighted in precise order around the shipway. The entire ship had been built before it was built, every piece constructed, fitted, and tested in workshops around the yard. Now they would assemble it like a massive speed build demonstration. Kaiser had handpicked his best workers for this supreme effort. The team included Catherine Glasscock, a former schoolteacher who had become one of the fastest welders in the yard, laying beads at 35 feet per hour, a rate German welders rarely achieved. Richmond Jones, an African-American former sharecropper, operated the main crane with precision that allowed placement of 250-ton sections within an inch of their marks. Mary Piloseno, a 19-year-old Italian-American, supervised the electrical installation team that would wire 5 miles of cable in under 20 hours. Hour by hour, the ship took shape at impossible speed. The bottom hull plates were welded in place within 6 hours. The side shells were up within 18 hours. By the end of the first day, observers could recognize the outline of a ship. The prefabricated deckhouse, complete with plumbing and wiring already installed, was lowered into place on day 2, a single lift that would have taken German shipyards a week to accomplish. The engine, a 2,500 horsepower triple-expansion steam monster weighing 140 tons, was lowered into place on day 3. It had been assembled in Toledo, tested, partially disassembled for shipping, and arrived with engineers who could install it in hours instead of weeks. On November 12th, at 3:30 p.m., the SS Robert E. Peary was launched, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was laid. She displaced 14,245 tons and would need only minimal fitting out before entering service. The impossible had become routine. The first credible reports reached Berlin in December 1942. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights using long-range Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors brought back photographs that German intelligence initially refused to believe. The images showed dozens of Liberty ships under construction at single shipyards. Hauptmann Wilhelm Dommes counted over 200 ships under construction in aerial photographs. His report, submitted December 15, 1942, warned, "If these observations are accurate, American shipbuilding capacity exceeds our estimates by a factor of 10. The report was suppressed. Göring refused to accept that his assessment had been wrong. "The photographs are deceptive," he told his staff. "The Americans are showing us the same ships from different angles to create an illusion of mass production." But U-boat commanders were reporting disturbing changes. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Bargsten of U-521 noted in January 1943, "Convoy HX-222 contained 47 merchant vessels, all appearing newly constructed. Standard types, obviously mass-produced." Where are these ships coming from? The answer was everywhere. 18 American shipyards were now building Liberty ships. The Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore employed 47,000 workers and was launching a ship every 4 days. The California Shipbuilding Corporation was completing one every 5 days. Workers who had never seen the ocean were building ships faster than experienced German craftsmen. By March 1943, American shipyards were completing Liberty ships at a rate that defied German comprehension. 3 ships were launched daily. Admiral Dönitz's staff calculated that U-boats would need to sink 1.3 million tons monthly just to break even. The best month for U-boats was November 1942, when they sank 729,000 tons. They were already losing. Each Liberty ship required 250,000 different parts. The hull alone needed 30,000 separate pieces of steel, cut to precise specifications. The electrical system used 25 miles of wiring. The ship contained 3,500 feet of piping, 2,500 valves, and 350 miles of welding. Yet American workers were assembling these complex machines in an average of 42 days by mid-1943. The workforce itself contradicted Nazi racial theories. Of the 650,000 Americans building ships, 200,000 were women, Rosie the Riveters, who proved that gender had nothing to do with industrial capability. African Americans, whom Nazi ideology dismissed as inferior, were operating cranes and laying welds that exceeded German standards. At Kaiser's Richmond yards alone, integrated work crews, impossible under Nazi racial laws, were producing a ship every 51 hours by May 1943. The diversity was staggering. Chinese-American welders worked alongside Norwegian immigrants. Native American riveters from New Mexico collaborated with Jewish refugees from Germany. Mexican-American women supervised crews that included poor whites from Appalachia. This coalition of the supposedly inferior was outproducing the German master race by factors that defied calculation. May 1943. Wolf's Lair, East Prussia. Admiral Dönitz stood before Hitler with devastating news. In what became known as Black May, the U-boats had lost 41 submarines while sinking only 50 merchant ships. American shipyards were building ships 3 times faster than U-boats could sink them. Mein Führer, Dönitz reported, the Americans launched 140 merchant vessels last month. We sank 41. At this rate, they will have replaced every ship lost since 1939 by year's end. Hitler turned to Göring, whose corpulent frame seemed to shrink under his gaze. You assured me the Americans could only build consumer goods, Hitler said quietly, his voice containing the menace that preceded his violent rages. Göring attempted to deflect. The ships are of inferior quality, mein Führer. They will break apart in storms. Our intelligence reports— Your intelligence, Hitler interrupted, is worthless. The Americans are outproducing us in every category. The numbers were undeniable. American factories were producing 8,000 aircraft per month. German production, despite Albert Speer's efforts, reached 2,000. American tank production exceeded 2,000 monthly. Germany managed 500. The Liberty ships were just the visible symbol of an industrial supremacy Germany could never match. On October 4, 1943, Göring gave the speech quoted at this script's opening, still clinging to denial even as evidence mounted. He told aircraft manufacturers, "The Americans claim fantastic production figures. They say 8,000 aircraft per month. This is naturally impossible. Even if true, the quality must be inferior. Quantity without quality is meaningless." But even as he spoke, Göring knew the truth. Luftwaffe pilots reported that American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts were superior to German fighters. B-17S and B-24s were appearing over Germany in 1,000-plane formations. The inferior American aircraft were systematically destroying German cities. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland confronted Göring after the speech. Herr Reichsmarschall, I have seen captured American production figures. They are building 500 4-engine bombers weekly. That's more than we have fighters in total. Your dismissal of their capabilities has doomed the Reich. Göring retreated to Karinhall, his hunting estate, where he consoled himself with the masterpieces he had looted from European museums. The most credible witnesses to American industrial might were U-boat crews facing it directly. Kapitän-Leutnant Heinz Schäfer of U-977 wrote, "By late 1943, the convoys were enormous, 80, 90, sometimes 100 ships, most new American construction. We would sink 1 or 2 if lucky, but it was like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon. For every ship we sank, 3 new ones appeared on the horizon." Oberleutnant zur See. Herbert Werner, commander of U-415, provided perhaps the most eloquent testimony. We could see the Liberty ships through our periscopes, painted in fresh grey, their hulls bearing the marks of mass production, welded seams instead of rivets, standardized deck equipment, identical profiles. They came in endless processions, each convoy larger than the last. We began to understand that we were fighting not just ships, but an entire industrial system that could replace losses faster than we could create them. The psychological impact was devastating. American broadcasts announced ship launchings like sports scores. German submarine crews stopped counting because the numbers were driving them to despair. By January 1944, American production statistics were being broadcast as psychological warfare. German intelligence could only listen as the numbers were announced. Ships completed in 1943, 1,238 Liberty ships, 203 Victory ships, improved versions, 122 tankers, 367 military vessels, monthly production peaks, December 1943. 155 merchant ships launched, 8,789 aircraft delivered, 2,464 tanks completed, 153,000 military trucks manufactured. Wilhelm Zangen, head of the Reich Association of German Industry, reported to Hitler in February 1944. The Americans are producing annually 100,000 aircraft to our 25,000, 50,000 tanks to our 19,000, 2.5 million military vehicles to our 100,000, 2,500 merchant ships to our 200. These ratios are not sustainable for even another year. Hitler allegedly threw the report into the fireplace, shouting, "Defeatist propaganda," but the numbers were conservative. Actual American production in 1944 would exceed even these estimates. Independent confirmation came from Germany's Japanese allies. Commander Toshikazu Omai, assistant naval attaché in Berlin, sent a coded message to Tokyo in March 1944. German leadership continues to underestimate American production capacity. Have verified Americans launched 173 ships in February alone. German officials refuse to believe. Their delusion endangers strategic planning. Recommend Imperial Navy assume American production is double German estimates. The Japanese, facing American might in the Pacific, had no illusions. Admiral Yamamoto had warned before Pearl Harbor, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." He understood what Göring never grasped, that American industrial capacity, once mobilized, was essentially infinite from the perspective of any enemy. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the ultimate demonstration of American industrial capacity. German defenders saw an armada that defied comprehension. 6,939 vessels, including hundreds of Liberty ships loaded with supplies, vehicles, and ammunition. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, commanding the 716th Infantry Division, reported, "The sea is black with ships. They stretch to the horizon in every direction. This is not an invasion, it is a migration. Every Liberty ship in that vast fleet represented 42 days of American industrial effort. Every tank coming ashore was one of 88,410 America would produce during the war. Every jeep was one of 639,245 that would roll off assembly lines. The landing craft themselves, thousands of them, had been built in places like Evansville, Indiana, and Quincy, Illinois, by workers who had never seen the ocean. Oberst Ernst Goth, defending Sword Beach, later wrote, "We had been told Americans were soft, that their soldiers would break under pressure, that their equipment was inferior. But I watched their engineers build a floating harbour in 5 days that was larger than most German ports. Their trucks climbed our beach obstacles like mountain goats. Their supposedly inferior fighters swept the Luftwaffe from the skies." Even as American bombs fell on Berlin in February 1945, Göring maintained his fantasy. He told his staff, "The American production figures are inflated. Many ships are probably wooden mock-ups for propaganda purposes." His deputy, General der Flieger Karl Koller, recorded, "The Reichsmarschall lives in fantasy. Yesterday, 1,000 American bombers destroyed Leuna. He still insists they cannot have built so many aircraft. When I showed him crashed bomber serial numbers proving at least 15,000 B-17 and B-24s have been built, he accused me of defeatism." The truth was worse. America had produced 31,000 four-engine bombers by war's end, 18,482 B-24 Liberators, and 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. This single category of aircraft exceeded Germany's entire aircraft production for the war. When Americans captured the Reich Air Ministry in May 1945, they found Göring's intelligence files. Report after report warning of American capacity had been stamped unreliable or enemy propaganda in Göring's hand. One report from June 1943 stated, "American shipyard in Panama, visible from neutral waters, counted 17 Liberty ships under construction simultaneously. Estimated completion rate 1 every 3 days. Göring had written, 'Impossible. Agent compromised or insane.'" Another, from December 1943, announced completion of the 1,000th Liberty ship. Göring's notation, "Propaganda." Actual number probably less than 200. Major William Hutchinson, reviewing the documents, later wrote, "It was staggering to see how completely the German leadership had deluded themselves. They had accurate intelligence but refused to believe it because it contradicted their racial theories and pre-war assumptions." At Nuremberg in 1946, Göring was confronted with production statistics: 2,710 Liberty ships, 531 Victory ships, 296,429 aircraft, 88,410 tanks, 2,383,311 military trucks. Göring responded, "These figures represent quantity, not quality. We Germans emphasized quality over quantity." Prosecutor Robert Jackson then showed a captured German report from 1944, written by Göring's own staff, admitting American aircraft were superior in every category: speed, range, armament, and reliability. Göring fell silent. In conversations with psychiatrist Dr. Gustav Gilbert, Göring finally admitted, "I underestimated the Americans. I thought they were soft, spoiled by luxury. When I said they could only make consumer goods, I believed it. It was the greatest miscalculation of my life. They buried us under an avalanche of production." German dismissal of American capacity had fatal consequences. Admiral Dönitz continued the U-boat campaign after it became mathematically impossible to win. Of 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 28,000 died. A 70% casualty rate, the highest of any service in any nation during the war. These men died trying to sink ships that were being replaced faster than they could be destroyed. The Luftwaffe, believing Göring's assurances about limited American aircraft production, continued offensive operations long after they should have shifted to pure defense. Result: 433,000 Luftwaffe personnel killed trying to fight an enemy producing 50 aircraft for every German plane. The U-boats themselves tell the story. Germany built 1,162 U-boats during the war. They sank almost 3,000 Allied ships, 175 warships, and 2,825 merchant ships. But the Allies built 5,777 merchant vessels. For every ship sunk, 2 were built. Mathematics doesn't lie, even when Reichsmarshals do. Behind the Liberty ships stood 18 million Americans engaged in war production, more workers than Germany's entire armed forces. The Richmond shipyards alone employed 93,000 workers at peak, more than Germany's entire shipbuilding industry. These workers came from everywhere, shattering Nazi theories about racial and social hierarchy. Emma Martinez, a Mexican-American welder at Todd Houston Shipbuilding, completed 300 feet of perfect welding per shift, a rate German welders rarely matched. Dorothy Luck, a housewife from Oakland, became a crane operator handling 250-ton lifts. Thomas Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama, became a ship fitter whose precision exceeded German standards. They worked in conditions impossible under Nazism: integrated cafeterias despite local segregation laws, childcare centers for working mothers, medical clinics providing free healthcare. Workers earned $1.20 per hour, more than German skilled workers earned daily. They bought war bonds with surplus income, while German workers faced execution for slowdowns. The contrast was stark. American workers voluntarily worked overtime for extra pay and pride. German factories relied increasingly on slave labour, workers from conquered territories who actively sabotaged production when possible. While American workers' children attended school, German teenagers were drafted into anti-aircraft crews. While American workers suggested improvements that sped production, German workers who pointed out problems risked being shot for defeatism. Liberty ships showcased American innovation that Germany couldn't match. Welding replaced riveting, reducing construction time 30% and weight by 600 tons. The technique, developed by Lincoln Electric Company, was so advanced that captured German engineers declared it impossible without seeing demonstrations. Prefabrication reached levels Germany never achieved. Entire deckhouses were built miles from shipyards, complete with plumbing, electrical systems and furniture. They were transported by specially designed rail cars and lifted by cranes that could handle 250 tons, 5 times the capacity of Germany's largest shipyard cranes. The production system itself was revolutionary. Henry Kaiser introduced assembly line techniques where workers specialized in specific tasks. A welder might work on the same type of joint for months, achieving speed and perfection impossible with traditional methods. The learning curve was so steep that workers who had never seen a ship in July were outproducing veteran German shipwrights by December. Each Liberty ship required materials from across America, delivered with precision German logistics officers declared impossible. Steel plate from Pittsburgh arrived exactly when needed. Engines from Toledo were delivered complete and tested. Electrical generators from Schenectady appeared precisely on schedule. The railroad system supporting this miracle moved staggering quantities. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone transported 50 million tons of war materials in 1943, more than Germany's entire rail system despite slave labor. American railroads achieved this while maintaining civilian passenger service. Major Hans Kerl, a German logistics officer who studied American production after the war, wrote, "We struggled to supply single factories. The Americans supplied entire industries. We counted boxcars, they counted trainloads. We planned in weeks, they planned in years." Even as Liberty ships poured out, Americans were improving the design. Victory ships, introduced in 1944, were faster, 15 to 17 knots versus 11, larger and more sophisticated, yet built almost as quickly, 42 days average. The Victory ship program demonstrated American ability to innovate while maintaining mass production. New turbine engines replaced old systems. Improved hull designs increased speed and capacity. Better ventilation preserved cargo. Enhanced navigation equipment improved safety. All incorporated without slowing production. By contrast, German attempts to improve submarines, the Type 21 program, produced chaos. Only 4 Type 21 U-boats were operational before war's end, while America built 531 Victory ships in 18 months. The economic disparity made Göring's dismissal delusional from the start. 1941, American GDP, $126 billion. Germany's $35 billion. American steel production, 80 million tons. Germany's 20 million tons. America produced 26 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity. Germany produced 8 billion. American production increased 170% during the war. German production increased only 30%, despite Speer's desperate efforts. By 1944, America spent $90 billion annually on war, more than Germany's entire pre-war GDP. The Liberty ship program alone cost $4.6 billion, exceeding Germany's entire U-boat fleet expenditure. Dr. Rolf Wagenfuhr, head of German wartime statistics, calculated after the war. America outproduced Germany 6-1 in raw materials, 8-1 in finished goods, 12-1 in transportation capacity. We were not defeated. We were buried. American production became a weapon itself. The Office of War Information broadcast statistics to Germany. German soldiers heard America was building a ship every 8 hours, a plane every 5 minutes, a tank every 7 minutes. They didn't believe it until they faced it. Gefreiter Helmut Roemer, defending Normandy, wrote, "The Americans announced 10,000 planes for Invasion Day. We laughed. Then the sky turned black with aircraft. Everything they told us was propaganda turned out to be true. Everything our leaders told us was true turned out to be propaganda." Each Liberty ship became a symbol of American invincibility. German propaganda tried mocking them as ugly ducklings, but U-boat crews knew better. As one captured submariner told interrogators, "When convoys of 50, 60, 70 of these ships appeared, we knew the war was lost. Mathematics doesn't lie, even when politicians do." After Germany's surrender, American investigators surveyed German industrial leaders about their wartime assessments. Their responses uniformly damned Göring's judgment. Fritz Thyssen, the steel magnate who had helped Hitler rise to power, stated, "Göring lived in fantasy. He visited America in the 1920s, saw only speakeasies and jazz clubs, never steel mills or auto plants. His ignorance cost Germany the war." Albert Speer was more damning. Göring's dismissal of American production was criminal negligence. By the time I became armaments minister, it was too late. The Americans produced monthly what took us a year. The Liberty ships were just the visible symbol of an industrial supremacy we could never match. Even Alfred Krupp, whose factories had been the pride of German industry, admitted, "We produced the best steel in the world, but in artisan quantities. The Americans produced good steel in oceanic quantities." One Liberty ship contained enough steel for 50 Tiger tanks. They built 2,710 Liberty ships. We built 1,347 Tiger tanks. The arithmetic is inescapable. Even the Soviet Union, America's ally but ideological rival, was stunned by American industrial output. The Liberty ships became the lifeline not just for Britain but for the Soviet war effort as well. Marshal Georgy Zhukov wrote in his memoirs, "The Americans gave us 400,000 trucks, 13,000 tanks, 15,000 aircraft, and 17 million tons of supplies. But what truly amazed us were the Liberty ships themselves, delivering these supplies through Arctic waters under constant German attack. Each ship that reached Murmansk represented a victory of American industry over German submarines. Without these ships, we could not have driven to Berlin." Nikita Khrushchev, who supervised Ukrainian industrial production during the war, was characteristically blunt. "Without American trucks, we couldn't have moved our artillery. Without American steel, we couldn't have built our tanks. Without American food, we couldn't have fed our army. The Liberty ships brought us everything from boots to telephone wire to spam. Göring's dismissal of American industry was a gift to us. It meant Germany underestimated the force that was supplying both fronts against them." Soviet Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov added perspective. "We lost many ships to German U-boats in the Arctic convoys. But for every ship sunk, the Americans built 3 more. The Germans could sink ships. The Americans could build oceans of them. The ultimate numbers. The final accounting reveals Göring's catastrophic miscalculation. Liberty ships, 2,710 built. 18 shipyards involved. Average construction, 42 days by 1943. Fastest, 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. Total tonnage, 29,292,000 tons. Cost, $1.8 million per ship average. Total merchant ships, 5,777 vessels of all types. 56 million deadweight tons. More than all other nations combined. Shipyard workforce peak, 1.7 million workers. Women, 600,000, 35%. African Americans, 250,000, 14%. Average wage, $1.20 per hour. Comparative production, USA versus Germany. Aircraft, 296,429 versus 111,767. Tanks, 88,410 versus 67,429. Trucks, 2,383,311 versus 350,000. Artillery, 257,390 versus 159,147. Machine guns, 2,679,840 versus 1,100,000. Ammunition, 41 billion rounds versus 8 billion rounds. U-boat war statistics. German U-boats built, 1,162. U-boats destroyed, 785. Allied ships sunk by U-boats, almost 3,000. Allied ships built, 5,777. Net gain, almost 3,000 ships. The Liberty ships transformed more than warfare. They transformed society itself. The shipyard integration, though limited by local laws, provided a model for post-war civil rights advances. Women proved industrial capability permanently, changing the American workforce forever. Kaiser's healthcare system for workers became Kaiser Permanente, now serving 12 million Americans. Production techniques pioneered in the Liberty ship program revolutionized global shipbuilding. Welding replaced riveting worldwide. Prefabrication became standard. The assembly line concept influenced post-war Japanese and Korean shipbuilders, who would eventually surpass American production using techniques Americans invented. Most importantly, Liberty ships proved democracy could mobilize more effectively than totalitarianism, that free workers outproduced slave labor, that diversity meant strength, not weakness. They vindicated Roosevelt's vision of America as the arsenal of democracy. At Nuremberg, awaiting execution, Göring maintained his aristocratic bearing, but could no longer deny reality. In his final statement to the court, he avoided the topic of American production entirely, the silence itself an admission. On October 15, 1946, 2 hours before scheduled execution, Göring committed suicide with a cyanide capsule. He died finally aware of his delusions. Dr. Gustave Gilbert, the prison psychiatrist, recorded Göring's last confession about American industry. "I should have known. A nation that could build the Empire State Building in 410 days could build anything, but I believed our propaganda about American decadence. The Liberty ships should have been named victory ships from the start. They were our defeat made manifest." Today, 2 Liberty ships still sail, the SS John W. Brown and SS Jeremiah O'Brien. They are the last operational witnesses to history's greatest industrial achievement. When they pass the Statue of Liberty on memorial cruises, their whistles echo across waters where U-boats once hunted, reminding us of when democracy was threatened by those who believed it weak. Commander Edward Ellsberg, who supervised salvage operations at Normandy, captured the essence of what Liberty ships represented. They were ugly, slow, and simple. But they were there, thousands of them, carrying everything from Sherman tanks to candy bars, from ammunition to blood plasma. They were the bridge between American factories and the fighting fronts. Göring thought Americans could only make consumer goods. He was wrong. We could make anything, including victory. The 2,710 Liberty ships stand as monuments to the danger of underestimating democracy based on prejudice and preconception. Hermann Göring's dismissal of American industry as limited to consumer goods echoes through history as one of the greatest strategic miscalculations ever made. While he clung to fantasies about American weakness, American workers were proving that in the arsenal of democracy, the only limitation was imagination, and the only shortage was of enemies foolish enough to test its capacity. The Liberty ships were not just cargo vessels. They were 10,000-ton proof that freedom, properly mobilized, could outproduce tyranny by margins that rendered military genius irrelevant. They proved that wars could be won in factories as surely as on battlefields, and that those who dismiss industrial capacity in favour of racial mythology do so at their mortal peril.